I first noticed her the way someone notices sunlight through a cracked window, not obvious, but impossible to ignore. She didn't enter the room. She seemed to arrive, and the space shifted around her without a sound. Mid-40s, graceful, every movement measured but effortless, like she had rehearsed it 1,000 times without knowing it. And yet, in the corners of her eyes, there was something fragile, a flicker of vulnerability that made her human, made her ache. I, 23, barely sure of how to exist around people like her, was standing too close to the counter, pretending to check my phone, but really listening to her laugh. It was soft, low, but it stayed in the air, tugging at me without permission. When she leaned forward, reaching for her coffee, our fingers brushed, just briefly, and my palm burned longer than it should have. She didn't flinch. Not exactly. Her eyes flicked to mine, just long enough for me to notice the way she swallowed, the faint pause before she looked away. Her presence filled the small cafe, and I felt it like a pulse, steady, rhythmic, and demanding attention without trying. I wanted to tell her something, anything, but the words were caught behind a thin wall of awe and hesitation. I studied her, traced the line of her jaw, the tilt of her neck as she smiled at the barista, and felt that quiet, unnameable pull. "You always come here at this hour?" she asked, voice calm but teasing, like she already knew the answer. Sometimes, I said, too casually, and immediately regretted it. My fingers found the rim of my cup and circled it like a nervous tick. She laughed again, lighter this time, and something inside me loosened. That laugh, though, carried layers, a hint of something unspoken. Maybe she had been through this before, maybe not. I didn't care. I only knew that I wanted to lean closer, to see if her warmth would reach across the space between us. We settled into an easy rhythm of proximity, but not closeness. She tilted her shoulder toward mine while reaching for her bag, just enough for her perfume. Subtle, a mix of cedar and something soft, like warm pages of a book, to brush past me. My stomach twisted in a way I wasn't ready to admit, and I could feel her noticing it, too, without her saying anything. There was no music. The hum of the cafe, the scrape of chairs, the hiss of the espresso machine, it all felt amplified, as if the world had pressed pause just for the two of us. I wanted to break it, to speak, to do something reckless, but I held back. She held her own space with quiet certainty, and that made every little hesitation of mine feel exposed. Then, the moment she turned, our eyes locked longer than anyone would think polite, and I almost forgot to breathe. My hand brushed hers again, accidental maybe, but her gaze didn't flicker, didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled. Not a full smile, just the kind that hints at secrets, at promises, at things you're not supposed to say out loud. And just as the tension reached a pitch, the door swung open behind her with a sudden, clattering crash. A gust of cold air hit us both, scattering papers on the counter. Her head snapped toward it, eyes wide, and I realized I had been holding my breath. For the first time, she didn't look at me, and yet the air between us was electric, heavy, with everything left unsaid. I wanted to follow her gaze. I wanted to speak. I wanted to stay frozen there forever. But neither of us moved. And just like that, the world returned, a little too quickly, and nothing would ever feel the same again. I caught myself watching her, before I even realized it, not openly, not like a fool, but in those little moments when she didn't think anyone was looking. The way her fingers traced the edge of her notebook, the slight furrow in her brow when she concentrated, the quiet exhale when she sipped her coffee. There was history in her eyes, though. Not mine, exactly. History she carried like a secret weight, tucked behind her elegance. She had told me once in passing about a marriage that had quietly unraveled, about a home that smelled of regrets, about a loneliness she wore as easily as a scarf. And maybe that was why she moved the way she did, poised, confident, but just out of reach. I understood that better than I wanted to admit. I was used to watching from the edge, quietly waiting for a life that felt larger than me. Somehow, we mirrored each other's solitude, though she would never say it. The cafe was quieter now, afternoon light slanting through the blinds in stripes across her hair. She leaned over the counter to read something on my phone, a simple gesture, nothing remarkable. And yet, the brush of her hand against mine made my chest tighten. I wanted to pull away, but I couldn't. I felt her warmth lingering, just a heartbeat too long. "You really pay attention to everything, don't you?" she said softly, almost teasing, almost accusatory, and I noticed the way her shoulder was inches from mine. She let it linger, just enough for me to feel the faint heat of her arm, and then she pulled back, as if testing a boundary she wasn't ready to cross. I imagined how it would look to the world. Her, mid-40s, composed, admired, and me, 23, fumbling to meet her eyes without looking desperate. It was taboo. Yes, though I didn't want to call it that out loud. Something about it felt forbidden, dangerous only because we cared more than we should. Yet every stolen glance, every accidental touch, every pause in conversation that stretched a second too long made it impossible to deny. She spoke again, and her breath brushed my ear as she whispered the name of some trivial thing on the menu, and I caught myself leaning just a little closer, unwilling to retreat. The air between us was charged not with words, but with possibility, with the tension of everything we weren't saying. I wanted to tell her something reckless, something honest, but my throat closed up, and I let the silence do the talking. She smiled at me then, just a flicker of a smile, and it held more than 1,000 sentences ever could. My hand twitched, almost reaching for hers again, almost bridging that tiny, perfect space between us. Instead, I rested my cup on the table, trying to steady the pulse in my veins, and she rested her hand on mine, not fully, not deliberately, but enough. Just enough for the warmth to settle, for the connection to spark, and for both of us to understand something unspoken. We didn't say anything after that. We didn't have to. The air hummed between us, and in that quiet, charged pause, we both knew we were stepping into something that could not be untangled, something far more intense than either of us was prepared for. And yet, I didn't want to leave. The cafe had emptied, leaving only the faint hiss of the espresso machine and the low thrum of traffic outside. We sat across from each other, words thinning, silences stretching. Every glance, every twitch of her hand, felt magnified in the quiet. I could feel her eyes tracing me in a way that made my chest tighten, not accusatory, not teasing, but curious. I reached for my cup, and she leaned slightly forward, the curve of her shoulder brushing mine. It was accidental, probably, and yet my body registered it like a signal. My fingers twitched. I wanted to close the gap, to trace her knuckles with mine, but I froze, reminding myself this was complicated. Complicated. The word hovered between us, unspoken. And then, the moment shattered. My phone buzzed against the table. A message, sharp and invasive. I glanced down. It was nothing urgent, nothing important, but in that tiny interruption, the tension between us snapped back to reality. I looked up too quickly, and her eyes were on me, amused, slightly exasperated. "You're jumpy," she said softly, her breath brushing my ear as she leaned to point at the screen. My pulse spiked, my arm brushing hers again. She smiled, just a flicker, but enough to make my heart stumble. We returned to the silence, shorter now, each pause weighted with the knowledge that neither of us wanted this to end. She shifted in her seat, leaning closer, not intentionally perhaps, but I felt every inch of her near me, the warmth of her body, the subtle scent of her perfume that lingered like a memory I hadn't earned. Her hand hovered near mine, as if tempted, testing boundaries. I wanted it, wanted her, more than I had wanted anything in a long time. My chest tightened, my throat caught, and yet we didn't move. Not fully, not yet. Guilt crept in. I thought of the world outside this small cafe, of judgment waiting in quiet corners. I imagined whispers about the age gap, the reckless proximity, and for a second I drew back, trying to reclaim control. She noticed. Of course she did. Her eyes softened, but there was something teasing there, something dangerous. She didn't chastise me. She didn't retreat. Instead, she let herself linger, leaning just a little closer, as though daring me to cross the line. Our faces were inches apart. I could feel her breath, warm and tentative, against my cheek. My heart thudded unevenly, a chaotic rhythm I could no longer ignore. I wanted to close the space, to let lips brush, even briefly, to feel the spark, the confirmation of what was unspoken between us. But I held back, because desire alone wasn't enough. Because reason whispered caution. And yet, I didn't pull away entirely. Neither did she. When the bell above the cafe door jingled again, signaling someone entering, we froze. The moment fractured, but the space between us didn't fully collapse. Instead, something deeper settled into that proximity, a tether neither of us could ignore. Our hands finally touched, lightly, almost reluctantly, but long enough to anchor us to each other. We stayed that way, pulled closer than either of us should be, every nerve alive with tension, every heartbeat echoing a warning we both chose to ignore. I didn't know how we would navigate this, or if we even could. All I knew was that I didn't want to let go. The evening air was heavier than usual, thick with the promise of rain and something I couldn't name. We walked together along the narrow streets after the cafe closed, the street lamps casting pools of gold over damp pavement. Every step felt synchronized, yet every inch of space between us felt charged, vibrating with the unspoken. She stopped suddenly near a lamppost, turning to face me. Her eyes glimmered in the dim light, caught somewhere between challenge and vulnerability. I swallowed, my pulse hammering, aware of the small detail, the way her hand curled around her coat lapel, her fingers brushing the soft fabric, the subtle tremor I hadn't noticed before. She began, hesitating, and I felt my stomach tighten. The pause was deliberate, the kind that carries more weight than words. Yes, I whispered, barely daring to speak. Her gaze dropped for a fraction of a second, then met mine again, steady, unflinching. I don't usually, her voice faltered, low, trembling, just slightly. I don't usually let myself feel this. My chest clenched. I wanted to bridge the gap between us, to pull her close, to feel the warmth of her body against mine. But the world outside, the judgment, the age difference, the what-ifs, made me hesitate. Yet hesitation didn't stop me from leaning in, just a fraction, enough that I could feel her breath brushing my cheek, her hair falling across her forehead. I reached up, almost unconsciously, brushing it behind her ear. Her skin was warmer than I expected, the faint scent of her perfume grounding me in a dizzying way. She leaned slightly toward me, subtle, tentative, yet demanding in its closeness. "I shouldn't," she whispered, but it was soft, almost inaudible. "I know I shouldn't." The words only made my desire flare brighter. My hands hovered near her, my fingers itching to close the small space, to anchor her against me, to prove that neither of us could ignore this any longer. I was aware of every micro-movement, the tilt of her chin, the way her lips parted ever so slightly, the tension in her shoulders. "I can't stop thinking about you," I said finally, my voice low, rough, meant only for her. The words hung between us like a fragile promise. She froze, eyes widening just enough for me to see her pulse quicken. The silence that followed was not empty. It vibrated with all the things we hadn't said yet, with the fear and longing layered over months of restraint. Her hand brushed against mine, lighter than a touch, heavier than air, and in that instant I felt the world narrow to the two of us. She leaned just a fraction closer, her lips nearly brushing mine, and the rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, as if nature itself was conspiring to heighten the moment. My heart thundered, every nerve alive, every thought screaming to close the gap. And then she whispered, just for me, "Are you sure about this?" The words, low and tremulous, suspended the moment, a heartbeat away from everything, a kiss poised on the edge of inevitability. I didn't answer yet. I couldn't. But my hand lingered at her waist, my chest pressing just slightly against hers, and in that pause, the world fell away. We hadn't spoken all day, though every moment since yesterday's walk had been alive in my mind. The memory of her near confession, her hesitation, the rain, the almost kiss, it hovered between us, heavy and unyielding. I found her in the small park near her apartment, seated on a bench beneath an aging oak, arms wrapped around herself, as if trying to contain the storm I knew was raging inside. I approached cautiously, heart hammering, aware of every step, every breath. She looked up when I reached her, eyes wide, uncertain. And then she said it, a confession I hadn't anticipated. "I heard what you said to someone else," she admitted, voice tight, almost breaking. "About noticing me. About wanting me." For a heartbeat, I thought the world had stopped. I hadn't told anyone. I had only ever breathed it aloud when alone, in the quiet of my room, thinking she would never know. You heard? I managed, voice low, trembling slightly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She shifted forward, leaning slightly toward me, her shoulder brushing mine, and yet she pulled back just enough that it stung. The closeness, then the retreat, a delicate dance of desire and fear. Yes. And I shouldn't have, maybe. But I did. And now I can't stop thinking about you either. Her words hung in the air, electric, dangerous. I could feel it in the way her breath caught, the way her hands fidgeted in her lap, the way her body leaned just a fraction toward me, drawn by the same force I could no longer resist. My own hands twitched at my sides, itching to close the space, to hold her, to prove that none of this was a mistake. And yet fear clung to us both, the age gap, the whispers of judgment, the impossible reality of what we were treading. I saw it in her eyes, the pull of desire, and the weight of restraint, battling inside her. I stepped closer, my shoulder brushing hers again, my fingers almost grazing her hand. She didn't pull away this time. The air between us vibrated with all that had been unspoken. Months of glances, small touches, hesitant confessions in the dark of cafés and quiet streets. Every inch, every heartbeat screamed that this was real and perilous and unstoppable. I can't stop, I whispered, voice low, carrying the weight of truth, fear, and longing. My hand hovered near hers, trembling slightly, every nerve alive. She inhaled sharply, and in that breath I felt it, the surrender, the risk, the impossible magnetism of us. She leaned forward almost imperceptibly, and I mirrored her, drawn into the same orbit we had skirted for so long. And then, as our foreheads nearly touched, her lips so close I could feel the heat, she pulled back just enough to murmur, "If we do this, there's no going back." I nodded, barely daring to speak, feeling the gravity of the words, feeling the pull stronger than any fear, and knowing that the next choice we made would change everything. The rain began again, soft at first, then steady, mirroring the rhythm of my pulse, as we lingered, inches apart, trembling, suspended on the edge of inevitability. The street outside was empty, quiet except for the soft patter of rain against the pavement. We stood beneath the awning of a small bookstore, huddled close, bodies almost touching, but not quite. The world beyond the soaked street seemed to fade, leaving only the two of us suspended in a charged bubble of tension. Her eyes searched mine, sharp and searching, as if trying to read everything I had ever felt and everything I might yet do. My hands hovered near her waist, unsure whether to claim the space or respect the fragile restraint she maintained. I could feel the warmth of her coat, the subtle shift of her body toward me, and my own pulse thrummed in my ears like a warning. "I shouldn't," she whispered, voice tight, trembling slightly. "I shouldn't let this." But her words faltered as my hand brushed the hair back from her face, gentle, tentative, lingering at her temple. Her eyes closed for a fraction of a second, breath hitching, and the air between us thickened, taut with everything unsaid, everything longed for, everything dangerous. "I can't stop," I murmured, my voice barely above the rain's whisper. "I don't want to." Her chest rose and fell, close enough for me to feel, close enough that I could sense the rhythm of her heart. The hesitation, the fear, the longing, it all collided, raw and human, inside that tiny space between us. She leaned in, testing the proximity, leaning just enough for me to feel her warmth without breaking the boundary. And then it happened, the unspoken choice. We let go of the caution that had tethered us. My hand traced her back lightly, brushing over the curve of her shoulder, and she exhaled softly, surrendering to the pull she had resisted for so long. Our foreheads touched, a gentle press that carried more weight than any word, and I felt the friction of desire and restraint dissolve into something messy, real, human. "I don't care about any of it," she whispered against my lips, barely moving, letting the words fall between us like a confession. "Not the world. Not the judgment. Not the fear." "I feel the same," I admitted, voice low, raw. "I've felt it from the beginning." We stayed like that, so close I could feel her breath, the subtle tremor of her hands, the delicate pulse beneath her skin. No kiss yet, not quite, But the air between us was charged with every stolen glance, every brushed hand, every heartbeat that had led to this exact moment. For the first time, we didn't pull back. We didn't overthink. We didn't hide. The hesitation, the fear, the impossible gap in age and expectation, it all fell away, leaving only the undeniable, human connection between us. And in that quiet, drenched in rain and possibility, we finally understood each other fully. Not just the longing, not just the attraction, but the intricate, messy, beautiful mess of who we were together, right here, right now. We didn't need words. Everything had been said in the space we had finally allowed ourselves to occupy. The rain had eased to a soft drizzle, leaving the streets glistening with reflections of streetlights. We walked slowly, side by side, hands brushing until finally, as if drawn by gravity, our fingers intertwined. The simple act carried a weight far greater than any words could have. We reached her apartment, but neither of us wanted to part. Instead, we lingered in the doorway, bodies close, breaths mingling. She leaned into me, her head resting against my chest, and I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The warmth of her body against mine, steady and real, erased every lingering doubt I had carried about the age gap, about what the world might say, about the caution we had clung to for months. "I never thought I'd feel like this again," she murmured, voice soft, intimate. I could hear the honesty in every syllable, and it made my chest ache. "You don't have to think about it," I said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We're here now. That's enough." She tilted her head up slightly, eyes meeting mine with a quiet intensity that made the world outside disappear. I brushed her hair back from her face, lingering at the curve of her cheek, memorizing every detail. The way her lips curved in a half-smile, the faint shimmer of moisture from the rain, the warmth radiating from her. It was all real, all ours. We moved inside together, not rushing, not needing to. She settled onto the sofa, and I sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders touched. The closeness was simple, natural, a quiet testament to months of tension and stolen moments. I traced her hand with mine, fingers lacing effortlessly, and she leaned her head against my shoulder, sighing softly. In that quiet, shared space, all the fears, the judgment, the hesitation, the unspoken what-ifs melted away. Every small glance, every lingering brush of skin, every hesitant word that had carried us this far culminated here. And it was perfect, not because it was dramatic, but because it was human, messy, intimate, and true. We stayed like that for a long while, just holding each other, the world outside reduced to a muted blur. I could feel her heartbeat, steady now, mirroring mine, and in that rhythm, I found a deep, fulfilling certainty. We had arrived together, fully seen and fully accepted. Finally, she lifted her head, resting her forehead against mine, and whispered, I think I've been waiting for this, for us, longer than I realized." "I know," I said, voice soft, sincere. "Me too." No further words were needed. Our hands stayed intertwined, our bodies pressed close, and for the first time, the tension, the longing, the hesitation, everything that had defined us, had dissolved into something real and lasting. And in that quiet, rain-scented room, we simply existed together, warm, connected, and entirely alive. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?